Father Steve is a member of the Priest of the Sacred Heart. He has served as a seminarian in Eagle Butte in our parishes when we had their parishes on the Native American reservations. He has served as president of St. Joseph's Indian School, our residential Indian school in South Dakota. He has served as formation director, provincial counselor, provincial superior, and then most recently Vicar General and on the General Council.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is this turned on?
It only goes to the camera.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll try to talk loud. I'm a little bit quiet, but what I thought I called this talk Roaming in Rome. I was there for 9 years, and a subtitle might be Working, Praying, and Playing in Rome. So I thought I'd break it up into maybe 3 sections. I'll talk a little bit about the Priest of the Sacred Heart in Rome and what it's like to work part of the General Council for the international congregation. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Catholic Church in Rome, the Vatican and the life of the people and everything. And then I could, at the end, talk some about like tourism and things people want to see and everything. So we'll just see how it goes. And I hope you have questions we can intersperse along the way. The video feed is really slow, so I'll probably do more talking and less pictures. But this is a picture of our generalate in Rome. It was built in the mid-50s, and I'll tell you more about that. I'm curious, how many of you here have been to Rome before? Wow, about almost half. Okay. How many of those who haven't want to go to Rome? Yeah, it's on a lot of people's bucket list. And that was one of the nice things for me about being in Rome was that a lot of my family and friends took the opportunity to come see me while I was there. And so I did a lot of touring, and I got to be pretty good at getting the way around and knowing where things are. But anyway, the Priests of the Sacred Heart, there are about 2,100 of us in the world. And so we have our international headquarters in Rome. And every 6 years we have a general chapter or a congress where we elect our general council and our general superior. And I was the provincial of the United States, so I was an automatic delegate, and I got elected to be on the general council. And I served for 2 terms. I was there for 9 years. And now I'm on sabbatical, preparing to become the rector at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology in Hales Corners. But it's nice to be here for this month of November. There's a lot of activity already. We had the weekend, Immaculate Conception, Guadalupe, a couple penance services, and and then this night, tonight, cocktails and Catholicism. So this was built in the 50s when there were vast numbers of seminarians in the Italian province, and now there's not very many. And so half of the building is where we have our community international, and we have 65 rooms in the house. And we had anywhere from 40 to 60 guys living there, and they were from about 15 to 20 different countries. So it was very international. And we had to learn Italian to get along with each other. And we prayed in Italian, and at the table we would speak Italian. A big group of the guys, like Father David, come to study in Rome. They go to some of the pontifical universities, and they maybe study in canon law, church history, biblical studies. We've got guys doing communications. We have people studying the safe protection of minors. There's a special program for that. So we all come together. Our schedule is 6:30 in the morning is Mass, because the guys who go to school have to hit the road, hit the buses to get to the different pontifical universities. And those of us on the council, we usually meet in the mornings when we're there. And the afternoons, people still take a siesta. We have a big pranzo lunch at 1 o'clock. And then we come back to work about maybe like 3:30 after that. And we work till about 7, and we pray, we eat at 7:30, and whatever you're going to do in the evenings. But also being on the General Council, there's a lot of travel involved because we're in over 40 different countries. And so in my time there, I spent about 8 months a year in Rome and about 4 months on the road. And a lot of them were overseas trips to South America, to India, South Africa, Finland, Canada. Just really, I covered a wide swath of the globe in my time there. And it was really interesting to get to know the church from a very worldwide and international kind of a way. Our Superior General is Carlos Suarez. He's born in Spain, the Canary Islands, but he worked in Venezuela for many years. And he's got a new council now, and they're trying to make a 6-year plan to help all of us priests of the Sacred Heart to understand our spirituality better and to be able to share that mission with people like you in Southern missions. Okay. Sometimes we had, besides the guys who were studying degree programs, we would bring in a group for like our formation directors to have 1 year of training in Rome and run special courses for them. And then we had 1 year where we brought in people to become treasurers for the community, to learn how to, handle finances in an ethical way, an efficient way, how to do fundraising, how to do all those kinds of things, because those are important for the future. Now, the other half of our building is the Villa Aurelia Hotel. Rome is a big tourist center, as everybody knows, and it's also a city where there's a lot of bureaucracy. And it's hard to do any kind of remodeling because of all these historical buildings and everything, okay? But this is kind of the side view. We have a couple of nice courtyards in our buildings, because most of the buildings in Italy, they look huge from the outside, but they're not like solid. There's the courtyards, the beautiful courtyards, so everybody gets light and everything. And there's like a lot of green space in the city that way too. But the mayor of Rome, getting ready for the Jubilee of 2000, said, we don't have enough hotels for everybody. And a lot of you religious have these big buildings that are underutilized. I'll cut some of the red tape if you want to start to do some conversion. And so we remodeled, and we have a hotel that has about 80 rooms, and it caters especially to tour buses, to pilgrim groups that come in. Because we're only about 1.5 miles from St. Peter's, from the Vatican, so it's really quite convenient. We're right on some bus routes, and we have some parking in our place, which is unusual in Rome. In Rome, you might have to pay about like $50,000 to buy a parking space if you live in the city. It's like incredible. And so everybody drives these tiny little cars, and parking is a real adventure. The other thing that Pope Francis said is, yeah, you religious have or underutilized some of your spaces. We've got lots of migrants and refugees coming in to Italy. There's a real crisis, and there's no place to put people. I'd like you to open up your homes to some of them. And so we have hosted 1 or 2 people every year from many different countries. And we work with the Jesuits, have a social service program that does all the paperwork. And so we welcome them into our home. And we've had people from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Senegal, Mali, Ghana, Iraq, and Egypt, and it's a real different cultural, but we've learned a lot. And many of them were Muslim, and so we had some interesting conversations with our Muslim guests about what their faith and practice meant to them. But we try to be good stewards of our property in that way, too. Okay? The SCJs have 2 parishes in Rome also, and one of them is a basilica called Cristo Rey of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Christ the King. And it was, let's see if I can get it up here now. So the North Italian province runs Cristo Rey, and it's in a very more of a well-to-do part of the city. Whoop. And okay. And the Southern Italian province runs a church called Ascension, which is in a very poor part of the city. So you get a really different view from both of them and the experience. Okay, I'll just talk, I think, for now. And so we would try to help out in both places when we could, when they needed help and stuff. And you get a sense of the churches in Rome. Okay, I'll keep that part brief. Any questions about the SCJ's Priest of Sacred Heart General that you want to ask about? Steve?
What was your favorite country? I was fascinated by the lists that you gave. I mean, but is there one that really stands out from all the places you visited?
The most interesting was India. It's just such a vibrant country with so much. So it was so colorful, sounds, smell, the spices in the market, the activity. It got to be overwhelming at times too. But you saw a lot of poverty also, a lot of good people. But that was probably, and that was one of my main countries, so I went there 6 times. I tried to go every year, but when COVID came, I had like 2 years where I couldn't travel there. So that put it. Another place I really like going to Finland. The church is very small in Finland, only about 25,000 Catholics, but they're really close-knit and united. And it's just a country where there's a lot of, about half of the church is people who are native Finlandians, and then half are migrants who've come in to work. Vietnamese and Indians and Filipinos and from South America, and Poles, and all kinds of people. Thank you. Yes?
So we have so many newer priests and seminarians from Africa and Asia, and I was wondering if y'all had always been in those places or if they were newer missions.
Africa is one of the first missions that we had. We went into the Congo when there was no church, after Stanley Livingston kind of thing, We went to the Stanley Falls is where our base is. And the Asian entities are newer. The Philippines about 30 years ago. Well, Indonesia, though, was one of our early missions too. The Dutch went to Indonesia 100 years ago. They just celebrated their centennial, just like the United States celebrated a centennial. And so the other Asian countries are newer, and Congo, Cameroon are both about 100 years ago. Yeah. Yes?
I have a silly question. What's a Vicar General?
It'd be like vice president, kind of. So the superior general is in charge of everything, and I'm like his valet carrier, Do what he tells me to do. Actually, I had a little more extra responsibility from being a counselor I was a counselor the first 3 years and a vicar general the last 6 years. Okay, and so like when Carlos wasn't around for the official meetings with the major superiors and the Pope, I would go in his place and take part in those discussions and things like that. And I had to sign some papers once in a while when he was out of the office, but with modern technology, I didn't have to do too much. He was aware of everything that was going on. So, okay. All right, I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about the church and churches in Rome, because I figure most people want to know what it's like when you go to see the Pope or what the Vatican's like or things like that. And St. Peter's Square is the hub of so much activity in Rome. And but there's a real vibrant church throughout Rome, too, in many different places. And there's so many beautiful churches and so much art and history. and saints and relics and everything, and architecture. So we had, in our house, we had our main Mass on Saturday night. And so Sundays, I took off and I just went and explored. I parish hopped, and I went to, there's about 350 parishes in Rome, okay? There's about 900 Catholic churches in Rome. So you don't run out. And Rome, we're talking of like 12 miles by 15 miles, okay? In that space, there's 900 churches, Catholic churches. And some of them are huge like that, and some of them are smaller than this room. You know, you get out into the neighborhoods and some really neighborhood churches. And it's interesting. I was there for about a year before I found a cry room in a church. And I said, these people know they got kids over here. Because I first started out going to all the historic churches in the center, but then I wanted to go out and see what life was like for the not for the tourists, but the Romans who lived there and everything. At St. Peter's Square, every Wednesday when the Pope is in town, he has a general audience. And so people can come to the square, listen to him speak, give a blessing. He has people who are newlyweds, they will come in their wedding attire, and he gives them a special blessing. And also if people are like bound to a wheelchair and sick and stuff, he will come and spend a special time with them. But he drives the Pope mobile around, and he picks up a few babies and kisses them and everything. And he gives a speech that's about maybe 8 minutes long, and then that's translated into like 7 or 8 different languages. So you hear the same thing over and over again in different languages. And then he says, if you have anything you want blessed, hold it up, and we'll just do the big blessing for everything. You can take that home with you, your rosaries, your statues, and things like that. And then on Sundays at noon, he comes from the balcony of the Apostolic Palace, and he gives the papal blessing, and he says the Angelus. And so those are 2 chances for people to see the Pope. You have to have a ticket to get into the Wednesday audience, but they're free, and you just have to ask somebody to get them for you. You can go up to the Swiss Guards and ask them a day or 2 ahead of time. And then the Pope usually has public masses maybe 3 or 4 times a month, or there may be other special prayer services. Now, with the Jubilee year starting, he's going to have a lot more public things. And some of those, all those you have to get tickets to, they're free, but it's like first come, first serve, or you have to know somebody to get them. But there are opportunities. And since we live pretty close, 1.5 miles, I took the opportunity to go to a lot of those kinds of gatherings. But I didn't go to everyone, because you'd have to get there an hour and a half ahead of time and go through security and wait. And, and masses are kind of long and everything. But, there's so many different things, like the Chrism Mass was really nice to go with the Pope and blessing the oils and praying for the priests. One I really liked was Guadalupe, because it was a bit smaller crowd, but it was more lively music. And of course, Pope Francis speaks Spanish so fluently and everything, and he could do that. There's the consistories where they make new cardinals, and I went to one of those, and we just had one a couple of days ago in Rome. But then there are other things, like he has Stations of the Cross, and on Good Friday they walk over by the Colosseum and have the Stations of the Cross, a candlelight ceremony, which is really nice. And I wasn't there for any conclaves or anything. He was the Pope the whole time I was there. Sometimes when we had like our general chapter, we got a special individual meeting with Pope Francis, where we would bring all the guys in our house and all the members of the chapter. So we might have like 120 people in the Apostolic Palace, and he would come talk to us for about maybe a half an hour. And he and his assistants would do some research and know what we were trying to be about and try to give us a message that was appropriate to us as priests of the Sacred Heart. And then when you're in those kind of a gathering, he always lets people come up and shake his hand and just say a few words, and he gives you a rosary, and then but you don't get a long time, but you're just going to say hi to him. One time, I was at a meeting with the religious superiors, and it was a kind of a day like today, and I just wore this actual sweater, and I was like the only color in the sea of black, and so I came down, shook his hand, and he looked at me and he pulled the sweater. He goes, "Hey, que bello," and he said to his guys. So it made me laugh and everything. So he's got a good sense of humor. Yeah. Any questions about the Pope or activities in the Church, the Vatican? Yes.
900 churches in Rome. Do all of these churches have priests, or do they have priests who have like 5 churches that they serve? I mean, like, are they experiencing the same problems that we are here in the States in terms of a severe shortage of priests?
They're definitely an older group of diocesan priests, and they're having much a hard time in Italy. But there's so many religious orders in Rome that have people studying that there's priests that can go out and do stuff. The last I saw, there's like about 1,700 diocesan priests living in Rome. There's about 7,000 religious men, priests and brothers, and there's about 20,000 sisters in Rome. Okay, and so many like ours have their generalate. So we have 45 or 60 people there, and many of our guys we would go out, and most of our guys would help out with convents that needed mass. And so we helped the Franciscans and the Battistini and the Carmelites. Okay, but definitely, especially after COVID, attendance is down. Rome is about 75% Catholic, and the Catholics about 20% go to church regularly of the Italians. So it's better than the rest of Europe, but it's really a marked decline. And so the churches are struggling financially, and they're trying to ask some hard questions. So, and many of the parishes have 2 or 3 worship sites with small little chapels. So they've got one person taking care of multiple ones like here.
That was my question, was about the priests, and then also if the churches, are full, not full, but well attended, but I think you just answered that. Since COVID, most people are going back.
Yeah.
So you might not actually need 900.
No. And a lot of churches, some of the big churches get help from the Italian state because they're, UNESCO heritage sites and things. And so there's certain amounts of money given to do remodeling and restoration because, some of the Pantheon is 2,000 years old, and so it's hard to keep that up. All the churches in Rome are free to go into, except for the Pantheon, which now I think you pay like €10 to go in. It's the Roman church. It's got the wide open hole in the top. When it rains and you're in there, it drains and there's tiles in the floor and everything. But where was I going with that? Some of the churches are kept up by weddings because people want to come to Rome to do their wedding, and it's kind of expensive, but it gives them money to pay the heat and electricity and everything. Okay. Some other questions? All right. The catacombs. The catacombs are a fascinating part of Rome. And in Roman society, in the old days, most people were cremated, but the Christians believed in the resurrection of the body, and so they wanted to give a dignified burial to the people. And the people that were really looked upon, the people we knew as saints and everything, people wanted to be buried close to them. And so my concept of the catacombs was very different than the reality. And I thought like the catacombs was like this hidden trap door or something that people snuck down into and nobody knew the secret location of. But the catacombs are huge, and there are something like 40-some catacombs in Rome, and okay, sorry, but I was going to do some pictures, but it's not very. In one catacomb of St. Callistus, there's 300,000 tombs, 300,000, and there's like 25 miles of tunnels and stuff, and it goes down 3 or 4 levels. So they're massive, and people. But now, in the time of Jesus, Rome had about 1 million people in that small area that was really probably like 5 by 5 miles with the walls around it. And by the year 450, the population was down to about 40,000. From 1 million to 40,000. When you talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, so there was the plague, disease, there was barbarian invasions, the economy had changed, there was hunger, there were some slave revolts, all kinds of things. And so that's why so much of the city fell into unuse and ruins and stuff. And a lot of it silted over. And there were some things that are huge they didn't even find till like 100 years ago when they started rediscovering things through archaeology. So when people started to rebuild Rome, they went to these old buildings and had some great marble and statues, and they were recycled. You know, they took stuff and they built new. So the Rome really had a big renovation in the late 1400s, early 1500s. The Renaissance is what we often call that period. So it's amazing, but there's still a huge amount of the walls all around the city are very intact, and it kind of defines that central core of Rome. When the barbarians started, and not just the barbarians, everybody started looting the catacombs because people were buried with, jewelry and things like that. And so the church became concerned that the early popes, the saints, that they didn't want their bodies disturbed. So then they started moving them into the city, into the churches themselves, within the walls. And so many of the churches have their tombs right in the church. Some are on the floor, some are in side chapels, some saints are buried underneath the altar. There are bodies on display. Even they're usually like in a wax kind of a face and stuff, so you don't see the decay. But the death is very prominent and real. And when you go into a lot of churches, you see reminders of that. You see lots of skulls and crossbones in the churches. And there's one church, the Capuchin Bone Crypt, it's called, that when they excavated a cemetery of all these Franciscan friars, they used all the bones to make like chairs and artwork, and it's like the whole walls are covered with bones. It's really a very different kind of a sensibility. But that's one place that was very interesting to take people to when they wanted to go see that. I'll tell you that. In the dress code, when you go into the big basilicas and St. Peter's, the women have to have their shoulders covered and their knees covered, okay? And my sister-in-law, who's not Catholic, came to visit, and we told her that, and she dressed up. She says, I can't figure this out. They want me to cover up my shoulders, and they got all these pictures of naked babies inside the church. I wanted to get in there. So I couldn't explain that one to her very well. The other thing she said that made me laugh, we took them to the Wednesday papal audience, and she said, I thought I was expecting to be very quiet and reverent, with the Pope coming. And she said, he came by the Pope-mobile, people jumped on their chairs, pushing, screaming, trying to take pictures. It was worse than going to a Cubs baseball game, she said. But there is that cult of celebrity when you go see the Pope. It's just like really something. And it's meaningful for people. The Swiss guards are from Switzerland. They guard the Pope. those colorful uniforms they wear were designed by Michelangelo, and they've been in existence for a long time. I'll pause there for now. Some questions you might have. Other questions? Yes?
Is St. Peter's body buried in the basilica underneath?
Directly underneath the altar.
It is.
Yeah.
Proof that it was his body that they found. I remember something about the feet were cut off, and they did that at that time.
They weren't sure until about 75 years ago when they were doing some reinforcement of the foundations and everything. And they went down and they found bones, and this is here lies Peter kind of thing. There's not 100% proof, but it makes sense because that main altar is right historically where the altar of the first basilica was built in the 3rd century by Emperor Constantine when Christianity became legal. And underneath St. Peter's, there's a necropolis. Okay, so there's a thing called the Scavy Tour. You've done the Scavy Tour? Okay, that's really a neat thing to do, isn't it?
Really neat.
Do you want to say anything about that, or?
When we went, they could light a light and you could actually see the tomb. And it's a direct line under the baldaccio. It was incredible. It took 20, 30 minutes to get down there. And we got the last ticket at that time. They closed it right after that. Mm-hmm. But it was just incredible. And you could just feel a sense of awe being down there. And the other tombs that were pushed up trying to get close to St. Peter.
It was like walking through a city. I mean, there were rooms and pathways and stuff. It was amazing.
Yeah, because a lot of the tombs were built like little houses in the day, the cemeteries back then. Okay. Yes.
You want to give a sense of the size of St. Peter's Square, because I remember the first time we were there and people were so excited about general audience, and yet the Pope was, from here to the street from them, and that's as close as he ever got to them because he was making the loop. But the square is so enormous that you're really not very close unless you get very lucky.
Yeah. St. Peter's Basilica, the church itself, seats about 7,000 people. And when they have the square, I think they figure they can probably get maybe like 50,000 people in that kind of a space. They don't set up that many chairs, but a lot of people will stand also. But it is large. It's really quite impressive. Everything, the scope and the size just kind of overwhelms you at times.
The demarcations in the floor in St. Peter's of other churches,
right.
And how big they would be,
Right.
And you're still 100
Right,
yards
right.
from the edge.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah, Lord.
So of all the churches that are in Rome, and I know you had to darken the doorways of just about every one of them, which one was your favorite? Because it is all sensory overload. I mean, just from my experience there, I know it was monumental just being there, and it's hard to pick, but there has to be something that moved you more than any of them.
My favorite church in Rome was called San Bartolomeo. It's on an island in the middle of the river, the Tiber, the Tevere River. It's one of the old basilicas, and it's not so much for the art, but it's for the symbolism, because they have the side altars are dedicated to the martyrs of the 20th century, and it's by like geographic areas. So there's an altar for the martyrs who died in Africa during the 1900s. There's an altar that's got people who died in South America, like it's got Oscar Romero's missal, or it's got things like that. There's one that's the victims of Nazis, one that's a victim of communists in Eastern Europe. And so you realize this is stuff that it really hits home, like within my lifetime. And plus that community, the San Egidio community, has good liturgies, they have good prayer. And we have one of our SCJ martyrs, Juan Maria de la Cruz, they have a letter that he wrote that's in there because they don't have much of his body left. And then another of our men who was killed by the Nazis in Italy, trying to defend the people, his body was washed out to sea and never recovered and stuff. So they have something from his novitiate, I think. So that's why, for me, that's the most meaningful, emotional one. Okay? Yes, sir?
You're in the city, do you wear a cassock?
No, our community doesn't wear cassocks anymore, usually. If I was going out to do Mass, I would wear a regular clergy shirt and black pants and everything. So, but it's like if you go to a papal Mass, it's like a liturgical fashion show because you see so many different kinds of habits and dresses, things, and, both men's and women's. Some of them are really colorful and, yeah. Yes?
Okay, so here's the question. Do you want to go back and stay?
I'd love to visit. I like being close to my family, and I've really loved everywhere I've been. I love South Dakota. I love Texas. And I just get a little taste of Mississippi. I'm enjoying my time here, but I find that wherever you go, it's the people that make or break a place, and there's great people everywhere. So, all right. Well, I'll just talk about a couple of tourist things. Rome has about maybe 4 million people in the metro area. This year for the Jubilee, they're expecting 35 million tourists to come in. So all year, this is going to be a lot of special events, but kind of crazy. The buses get really crowded. During COVID, we had no tourists. It was unbelievable. You could walk into St. Peter's with no wait. Just walk in anytime you wanted to. And it's amazing. And now it's like an hour and a half waiting in line to get through security there. If you go to Rome, I recommend do not go in July and August. It's much like Mississippi in July and August. And it's a city you want to walk in, and it just wears you out. It's so hot and humid during the summertime. The most popular times for people to come are like April, May, September, October, because you tend to get nice days like 75 degrees and, plenty of light still and everything. It can be expensive depending on where you stay. In our hotel is considered like a 3-star, and it's probably in the high season about $150 a night. In the low season, more like 110 or something. But you get down into the center, you could pay lots, $300-400 a night for some of the places right by the touristy places. When you go into restaurants in Rome, a lot of Americans, I heard them complain, they don't pay enough attention to us. We're used to people coming up, can I use some more coffee? Do you need anything? But the waiters that I knew said, our job is to put the food on the table and leave you the heck alone. And you got that table all night. We're not going to rush you out. That's your table. But, if you need something, get our attention. So it's just kind of a different in perspective.
And if you don't do it that way, they'll do this. Just avoid the table.
Yeah. So that's one thing. There's, in many of the restaurants, the bathrooms are kind of like co-ed. Like you go in, there's a sink, and then there's a men's and women's room off to the side, So, the first time I walk in, it's like, oh, I'm in the wrong place, because the women's wash their hands. And the other thing is a lot of you don't use your hands, there's a foot pedal for the water to come out. It's like, how do I wash my hands? So that was something to know about it. I have to tell my visitors about that before they come in. It's best to see the city by walking around, and there's so much to see that I tell people not to over-plan it. One of the real delights is just to walk the side streets and see what you see, wander into some shops, have a cup of coffee, get some good pastries, have a glass of wine, and just take your time. The streets, a lot of the old section is like cobblestone. And I've seen women wearing heels, and I don't know how they do it. But if you're going to Rome, bring some good walking shoes. Good walking shoes. There's a lot of green space in Rome. There's a lot of big parks. And those are some of the nice places to go to find some quiet and solitude in the midst of all the hustle and bustle. And some of the parks have some of the old artifacts too, some of the old fancy villas that the noble families had. We had a really big park, like 5 minutes away from our house, which was nice just to get out. There's a park of the aqueducts where you still see a lot of the old aqueducts. Some are intact, some are in ruins. But the architecture that built Rome was just incredible, that how it stood up for so long. The Colosseum, after Rome, kind of the fall of Rome, and the Colosseum wasn't being used, people would come and the most valuable thing was the metal bars that were holding up the stone blocks. They set them kind of like Lego blocks. And so people started chipping out the metal. And they say that when the earthquake came that caused the Colosseum to collapse, if the rebar had been intact, it wouldn't have fallen. It would have held up. But because people took out so much, that's what caused the collapse of the Colosseum. And they're starting to do some more restorations of the Colosseum. They did a lot of excavation of the really below decks and stuff. And they really, like if you saw the movie Gladiator or something, they did have elevators even that brought up the animals. One time they flooded the Colosseum and had a naval battle there. I mean, it's just amazing the stuff that they could do a couple of thousand years ago. So the Colosseum is always a must-see for people. St. Peter's is a must-see. If you want to go to the Sistine Chapel, you need to get a ticket for the Vatican museums. That's the way to do that. And the Vatican museums are just huge, and you could spend so much time in there. The problem is everybody wants to go to the Sistine Chapel, so it's like jam-packed, and you're just kind of walking like this to get to the Sistine Chapel. And there's so much wonderful stuff off in the side rooms, so many paintings and sculptures and things. In St. Peter's, I walked in and I said, wow, that is a beautiful painting, And then you get up close, and it's these tiny, tiny little mosaic tiles. I mean, thousands and thousands of them to make this great detail. And I think in terms of the art, I really like the mosaics better than anything because they were just really so intricate and so well done. Yeah. Okay. We're getting close to the time. I can stay for longer too, but some questions you want to ask? Yes.
Parisians are known to be kind of snooty to tourists and condescending. Are the native Roman citizens and Italians like that, or are they more open and receptive to visitors?
I found them to be pretty receptive. I found when I tried to speak Italian, they didn't make fun of me. They were helpful. They were honored in a way. They always say, "Oh, you speak so well." Yeah, I know I don't, but it's nice to hear that. And they know that that's where their bread is buttered too. They try to take care of people. And you meet some bad apples, but I think generally the Italians have just more of an atmosphere of being friendly and welcoming.
I got one more question.
Okay.
Did you ride in a Ferrari?
I did not ride in a Ferrari. We have a community house in Modena where they make the Ferraris, but I didn't get to ride in one. Yes.
I wish if you would comment for us on the relationship of the education that takes place in Rome and its ultimate effect on Mississippi. In my reading, there are so many monasteries, and I support the North American College. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in knowing how Rome teaches us in Mississippi.
Okay. I think probably more, not so much through the pontifical universities, but through the dicasteries and the secretariats that
Say that again.
there's in Rome the offices are called the dicasteries or the secretariats. So there's an office of education, and there's an office for clergy, and there's an office for bishops, and there's an office for religious life. And those are the ones that have the conferences and set the guidelines and give us the directions. And I think they influence the regular life in Catholic Church more so than the universities themselves. The universities themselves train people well, and because it's such an international group, there's a lot of exchange of ideas between countries and cultures, which I think enriches the church a lot.
My last priest had a PhD from one of the universities there, and it reflected in his work in our parish. I began to wonder then, how are we taught the truths of the church from that perspective of the teaching and the training that goes place in Rome, and how it plays out in our diocese?
I'm getting ready to become the rector of the seminary in Wisconsin, and so we have a revised edition of the program for priestly formation that emphasizes a lot of that, of, you know, the kind of person that you're trying to form as a priest, what their spirituality should be like, what their human formation in terms of being able to relate to people, what their intellectual formation is. And so there's a whole bunch of benchmarks that we have to take those. And so Rome has given a overall ratio, and then each country has to take that and adapt it to their own circumstances. And so there's a chain of command, and there's a lot of reporting back and forth. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of accreditation and stuff. So it is like the home office that kind of has to oversee things. And when the bishops come in at least every 5 years for their ad limina visits, the bishops have to report to the Holy Father, and they visit all these secretariats and offices, and they talk to the people. So that's kind of how it goes. David, one more question. Okay, one more question, then time. But I'll hang around a little bit. But last question, anybody? Yes.
What is the best month to visit with the least amount of tourists?
We just got back in November. We just got back in November, and it was beautiful weather and very uncrowded.
Yeah.
I think we got lucky too.
Yeah.
We got lucky.
November and January and February are the least crowded. Sometimes it's really nice weather, and sometimes it's cold. So it's kind of a guess, but it only snowed twice my 9 years in Rome. So, you know, okay. Well, thank you so much. You got some closing words from David here?